Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in World History. Today we're going to finish off our unit on ancient Rome by talking about Byzantium. Byzantium really is the eastern half of the Roman Empire, but it takes on a new identity. As the west falls, the east thrives. And so Byzantium really is the new Rome. It looks Roman, it even has Roman emperors, but it's also its own being to go along with that. So, our constructive response question that I'd like you to write at the top of your page says, describe the key elements of Byzantium that led it to be called the New Rome. Well, we're definitely going to see some things that make it Roman. My class has likely already seen Byzantium engineering and empire, and so we've seen some of the aqueducts, we've seen some of the Roman engineering, but we're going to add to that as we go through this today. So what will we learn? Well, we're going to talk about what was Byzantium. We've kind of already introduced it in class, but we're going to make sure that we understand definitively what it is here. We'll talk about Emperor Justinian, as he is key to this story. And we will also finish by talking a little bit about a split that occurs in Christianity called the Great Schism, which gives us the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity. And that kind of sets up some things that we're going to do second semester as we expand on Christian power in Europe. So that is going to be our path here today. So let's set the stage. Due to Germanic invasions, the Western Roman Empire had collapsed. That was our previous lesson. We looked at the social, political, economic, and military factors that weakened Rome. And then we talked about how the Huns pushed Germanic peoples onto Roman lands. The Romans couldn't do anything about it, and the Western Empire fell. So that's what we know. But what we need to expand upon here is the Eastern Empire thrives. So for nearly 1,000 years after the collapse of the Western Empire, Byzantium in the East would continue to thrive and build upon its Roman foundations. After all, it was ruled by Romans, so it's definitely going to be Roman. So let's take a look at this on a map. You've already seen this map. I showed it to my classes a few days ago. You have the distinct divide here, kind of right down the middle. The west here in orange, that's the piece that has fallen. Over here in pink, this is Byzantium. This is the eastern half of the empire, really anchored by Constantinople right here, built by Constantine. We saw that in engineering and empire. That will be the new headquarters, the new capital of what will be Rome. Even though the city of Rome is over here, remember Rome once controlled all this territory. So this was once called Rome as well. But now we're going to call it Byzantium, after the Greek city-state of Byzantine that once stood there. So, why was Byzantium called the New Rome? Well, it's pretty simple. It was Roman. Like I just told you, it was once part of the Roman Empire. It had Roman culture, it had Roman laws, so it was Roman. So some things that stood out specifically that made it Roman is it had Roman emperors. Those that ruled even from Constantinople considered themselves Roman emperors, even though they weren't seated in the city of Rome itself. It used Roman architecture, they had Roman culture, and of course they're going to embrace Christianity, which by this point had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. Much like the Roman emperors, Byzantine emperors ruled with absolute power, and they were head of the church as well. And so this is kind of the beginning of what will become the Catholic Church, or at least the Christian Church. And Catholic Church will be headquartered in Vatican City, which is in Rome, but we're seeing this consolidation of power within the church. Now, there are some differences. I mean, it definitely looks Roman, feels Roman, but it doesn't mean all aspects of it were Roman. So one of the main differences is in this part of the empire, they spoke more Greek. So they spoke Greek here instead of Latin. Why was Byzantium wealthier? Well, we had talked about this the other day when we said that they moved the capital from Rome to Byzantium. Part of the reason they did that is because there was more money flowing through this region. So let's talk about why that was. Byzantium's location was really its strongest suit. I mean, location is everything. So Byzantium was located in the middle of several trade routes that allowed it to prosper. We talked about how in the west the trade routes were filled with bandits and hostile tribes and people who were stealing stuff on the roads. You had less of that going on here in the east, and you had a connection between Africa, Asia, and Europe that allowed people to flow through here. So there's a lot of wealth still flowing through this region. On top of it, this area was further away from those Germanic tribes, so they weren't prone to the Germanic attacks like the Western empires. So it was, in a sense, safer to travel and trade in the eastern half of the empire. Now, Emperor Justinian is the most well-known emperor of the Byzantines. He takes control of Byzantium in 527 AD, and I like to look at Justinian as a mixed bag. I say that because you could look on paper and say he did some pretty amazing things, and we're going to cover a couple of those here. But we watch Engineering an Empire, and we know that he had a lot of his people killed. Not necessarily as a ruthless murderer, although you could make the argument for murder. It was more of a political decision, but he did have a lot of his people killed. So that's usually not considered to be a good thing. So there's definitely a mixed opinion on Emperor Justinian. But let's talk about him. So one thing that Justinian is well known for is setting up something called the Justinian Code. It was a uniform set of laws created from outdated Roman laws. Basically, it contained 5,000 Roman laws that were still considered useful. This is definitely an attempt to connect to Rome and still be Roman, but laws over time sometimes become outdated or they need to be rewritten. So he went through and they actually broke it up into 4 parts and kind of looked at these laws and kept the most useful ones, many of which existed from Rome. So the Justinian Code was considered to be a good law system used here in Byzantium. He was definitely a builder and a Christian on top of that. So he built many churches, including one of the most amazing churches on the planet known as the Hagia Sophia. It was hailed as the most splendid church in the Christian world. It had a huge dome, the largest dome that had ever been built at the time, several arches. I mean, it was a massive, massive building. And I'll show you a couple of pictures here on the next slide. Well, here we go. So on the left here, this is the inside. You can see the arches that held up the dome. It's really kind of a cool feat of engineering. The dome has collapsed, but they've rebuilt it. Eventually, the Ottoman Turks came in and took over this region. So it went from being a Christian church to being an Islamic mosque, which you can see the Islamic symbols there. And today it's a museum, so it sort of embraces both of those time periods. And it is still there and able to be visited in modern-day Istanbul, which was once Constantinople. Has been featured in a couple of movies like Argo and I want to say Armageddon. So it's possible you've maybe seen it before. Now, this was a Christian empire. We know Christianity had spread since the height of the Roman Empire. Constantine made Christianity legal. Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of Rome. So there's no doubt here in Byzantium, Christianity is going to reign supreme. So, like I said, Emperor Constantine had issued the Edict of Milan that had made Christianity legal. We've talked about that a couple of times, but it's worth mentioning here that here you have a Roman emperor, the same Roman emperor that moved the capital over to Byzantium, that was definitely promoting Christianity. But the church divides in 1054. This is known as the Great Schism. And I'm not going to go into a ton of details here, but one of the themes we're going to talk a lot about second semester is the power of the church, power of Christianity, the Catholic Church, and even the Reformation, which results in the Protestant Church. So what I'm trying to infuse here is a little bit of Christian history. So what we have is 2 branches of Christianity that result from this. In the West, you have the Roman Catholic Church, also known as Roman Catholicism. Of course, as you can probably guess, since Latin was the main language over there, most of the services were conducted in Latin. And that was true for hundreds of years. That has changed in the modern world, but a lot of Roman Catholic churches were basically centered in using Latin. The Pope, as you can see here, has authority of over all other bishops. We'll talk a lot about powers of the Pope second semester, but the Pope is the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the main rules is priests or clergy. Clergy are people who work within the church, like cardinals, bishops, even the Pope. They cannot get married. They cannot have sex. They cannot get married. They take a vow of celibacy. So some of you in here listening to this might be Catholic, and that might sound somewhat familiar to you. But I told you there's a split, right? There's two branches of Christianity. So with this great schism, over here in the East, we get the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is Christian. They follow the Bible. They believe in God. They believe in Jesus, just like the Roman Catholic Church. But they have some differences in how they worship and how they operate. For example, because of their location, a lot of their services were conducted in Greek or in local languages. So they didn't focus on Latin the same way that the Roman Catholic Church did. Instead of having a pope, they have the patriarch, who you see here, and other bishops might head up the church together as a group, and priests within the Eastern Orthodox Church may be married if they choose so. So, again, what I'm illustrating here is a division that occurs within Christianity. We see Rome being a Christian empire, but in the later years of this extension of Rome known as Byzantium, we see a split in Christianity that occurs. So Christianity has many different forms or branches that have a lot of things in common, but also have a lot of differences. And again, this is setting up some themes that we're going to see in second semester. So that's going to bring us to the end here. Our result: the Roman Empire dwindled into oblivion, allowing the Middle Ages to begin. I mean, the next big phase of European history will be known as the Middle Ages, and we're going to study that second semester. However, in the East, Byzantium held on for a few more centuries until they were toppled by the Ottomans, a powerful Islamic empire, in 1453. So Islam will become the dominant religion in that the dominant religion in that region a little bit later. And we're going to talk about that as we move forward. So we come back to our constructive response questions. Is describe key elements of Byzantium that led it to be called the New Rome. We said they had Roman emperors like Justinian. They used Roman laws. They had Roman architecture and engineering empire. We saw the aqueduct system like they used in Rome. They used Latin, Greek more or less, but they also had some Latin in this area. So there's a lot of connections here to being Rome. Plus, it was just controlled by the Roman Empire at one point. So anyway, that should give us a good rundown of what Byzantium is. I hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.